Hello and welcome to Veg Around the World with me, Meenakshi Garodia, where I believe in simple recipes, authentic taste. In this show, we explore one country at a time through its vegetarian cuisine. The country today is Sri Lanka. Now, I was very fortunate that I was actually in Sri Lanka earlier this month, and the food there is delicious. So Sri Lanka is this pretty big island country on the south of India. Like, it's in the Indian Ocean, and it's actually called the Pearl of the Indian Ocean. And it actually has a documented history of 3,000 years. Now, Sri Lanka has a very diverse ethnicity, very diverse population there. It has populations from the Moors who actually came there 1,000 years ago. The Muslim population there is actually the Arabic population that came through the Silk Route trades. It has the native Vedda, who were probably the originals there. But a lot of the majority now is the Sinhalese. And the Sinhalese actually came, it's a very interesting story. It's like this king came with some 700 followers, and actually he was apparently thrown out of his kingdom. So that is what the native Sinhalese is. And what's really interesting is Sinhalese sort of derives from the word Singh, which means lion. And that's on the Sri Lankan flag, and it's a very big deal in Sri Lanka. And lions are not native to Sri Lanka. So that probably came with this king where there were lions. The Sri Lankan food is actually extremely tasty. Now, being a coastal country, a lot of the ingredients are coconut, fish, which we're now going to be doing in this show, and it is very similar to coastal Indian food also. The dishes we're going to make today, we're going to make a lot of the basis of Sri Lankan food is in rice. So they have rice as rice. They have these rice noodles called hoppers, this rice noodle dish, and they have another hopper which is made with rice flour. Now, rice flour pancakes, and actually I'm going to make that. I'm going to make this hopper today. It is so delicious. You can literally have like 6, 7 without thinking about it, unless you put an egg in it. I'll show you that version too. You eat that as a sort of like the bread, and to go with it, you have, I'm going to be making a lentil dish. This is and another dish which is normally made with gourd. Because we don't have gourd and zucchini is easily available, and it doesn't taste so bad, so I experimented, and it's going to be with that. And something called coconut sambol, which is basically grated coconut with spices, which you sort of have almost like a pickle on the side. Now, again, typically that had dried fish in it, but I'm going to be making a fishless version. And the dessert, now this is something called Pongal. Again, it's a sort of harvest dish, and it's extremely tasty. Now, the story behind why I'm making this particular dessert is, when I was in Sri Lanka, we went to see this one Buddhist temple, which has the oldest banyan tree. It is a branch of the tree under which Buddha attained enlightenment. And just outside the temple premises, there were these natives, Sri Lankans, villagers, who had this pot. It was a metal pot, but in the shape of a clay pot. And they were making this dessert that I'm going to make today. And it looked so tasty, and it was just so nice because it's harvest and the purity of it. It's basically rice pudding made with coconut milk instead of regular dairy milk. And it has, believe it or not, chickpeas in it, like whole chickpeas. And you sweeten it with jaggery, which is made from like the raw form of sugarcane. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I really wanted to try it, and they really wanted us to, after, you make it and then you serve it up to the temple, and then everybody shares the rest. And they offered some to me, but living in America, I was a bit scared about the bacteria, so I didn't have it, but I really wanted to make it. So then I made it, and it's quite tasty. So I decided to have that as the dessert. We're going to start off with the things that take the longest to make, and in this case, that's going to be the lentils, the appam, and the rice pudding. So the appam flour needs to ferment. You can put, so we start off with yeast. What we're going to do is take a spoon. We're going to take some hot water, a mixture of hot water and around a cup. So this is really hot water, and I'm going to mix this with some cold water. And I'm just going to do a finger touch. So it should be lukewarm, not too hot and too cold. Again, my hands are nicely washed. And I'm going to put around a couple of teaspoons of sugar. Now, you can go ahead and put, it's not going to make it sweet. The reason for that is when you put yeast in, then they sort of like eat up the sugar. I don't know a better way of putting it. And put a good spoon of yeast because you want it to ferment. And We're just going to stir it up and set it aside for around 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, this should become foamy, frothy, and then I'll tell you what we'll do next with that. For the next thing, now for rice pudding, I like to soak the rice beforehand. So I've just taken basmati rice because that's what I normally use, and this is half a cup of basmati rice. So I soaked it overnight. I'm just getting rid of the water, and I'm going to put it in the bowl with a can of coconut milk. You can get coconut milk pretty much anywhere nowadays. Now, this won't be enough to cook it, so I'm going to add some water to it. Again, traditionally, this is made on the stove, but coconut milk is extremely sticky. So, if you like what I saw, there were 3 people who were standing there, and they were like, working away on it because it was like literally a labor of love. But I'd much rather have it there but not have to stand and literally slave over it. Okay, I'm going to stir it up. We don't add anything sweet yet. So we're going to put some chickpeas in it. Now, when I saw this, I was really stunned at the idea of like whole chickpeas in my rice pudding, but it actually tastes quite nice. When I first made it, I put very few in, but I realized I really liked the flavor of the chickpeas in it. Now, this is just from a can of chickpeas, and I'm putting in around half a can. So that's a half a cup rice and a half a can with a whole can of. Now, I'm going to put this in the microwave for around 10 minutes. Check the texture 10 more minutes just to make sure it's not boiling over. So very often I turn the microwave power down to 5 and I cook it for 10 minutes and then I check it from there. I'm going to put this in the microwave and be right back. And I'm back. So the last thing to start off right now in my first segment is the lentils. Now this is called yellow pigeon pea or split pea. So you know the chickpea, when you take this peel off and you split it open, this is what you get. You can get this in some ethnic stores. Personally, among all the like yellow dals, I call these yellow dals, there are 3 or 4 of them. This is my personal favorite. It just tastes really nice. Now, this takes a long time to cook because it's really dense. So the things you can do is soak it overnight, but even after that, you will probably need to cook it for a couple of hours if you don't have a pressure cooker. Luckily, I do have a pressure cooker because I make a lot of lentils, and I've mentioned this before, but like when you do lentils, if you have a pressure cooker, it is so much faster and so much easier. So this is the pressure cooker I use. This is actually just half a cup of chickpeas, but because it's been soaking overnight, it has absorbed the butter and expanded. So I'm going to put this in, and I put in hot water because some hot water if I have some, because the faster the water heats, the faster the steam builds up, and the faster the dish is ready. Now we don't need too much water, so maybe like twice as much, because a lot of it will come out in the pressure, and in this dish you don't want it to be too liquidy. In this we're going to add some salt, obviously. Again, when you're cooking something hard, if you add salt to it, it makes it much easier, it cooks faster. And the other thing I'm going to add is some turmeric. Now in Sri Lankan food and Indian food, we add a lot of turmeric, and apparently it's really good for Alzheimer's, so that, hey, it's a double whammy. Maybe that's why it's added to everything, but you just add a little turmeric. Now this is actually a spice rack that I have, and this is what I use regularly for cooking. You have different things. I have a couple of these which I use. So if you want, I'll just quickly go through this. So we cover this and set it up and let it go for around 4 whistles. There are different people think of pressure cookers as a certain amount of time or a certain number of whistles. Because this lentil was already soaked, the whistles is fine for this one. So now that those 3 things have started, we're going to start on the zucchini which is in place of gourd. Now you can take any of, I've just used these baby zucchinis, but originally this recipe is for snake gourd or bitter gourd. They are all these Asian sort of vegetables, South Asian vegetables, but they're quite tasty if you want to try it out. But essentially once you get the flavoring right, then you can use it with a whole bunch of different vegetables. I mean, I like you to use the vegetables that are available and in season around me, because those are the freshest. So, and the other thing we're going to do is coconut sambol. So I've started these. I'm going to add a little bit of oil to both of them. As you know, I like to multitask. We're going to do the zucchini first. So for the zucchini, we're going to add some fenugreek seed, some onions, some slit green chilies. Now Sri Lankan food is typically hot, so I'm not making it very hot, but there will be a spice level. And if you don't want it to be like very spicy, just cut out on the green chilies and red chilies that I put in. And we need some garam masala. One second, I'll be back. And I'm back. So typically in Sri Lanka, you have a Sri Lankan curry masala, but if you look at the ingredients, it's very similar to garam masala. So I'm just going to use garam masala. So a good teaspoon of it. Now Sri Lanka is also like the country of spices, because it is full of these spice plantations which are beautiful to see. And I'm going to give it a quick stir. And I'm going to add a little bit of turmeric to this, just for color. And again, that's something I like to add to my food in general. While this is on, for the coconut sambol, we're going to add onions. So this is around half a cup. We're going to add some ginger paste. This is garlic ginger, crushed, pre-crushed. Curry leaves. Now curry leaves are so tasty. A lot of people take them out. I personally eat them. A whole lot of red chili, like a serious amount. And I'm adding less than they add out there. And we're going to let this cook. Now the coconut, normally, ideally what you should use for this is fresh coconut. Getting fresh coconut and taking it off and grating it myself is not going to happen. Frozen grated coconut is not so bad. I got this in the local Chinese place. It's Thailand, whatever, but it's very good quality. So I'm just going to use half a packet for this. So if you look inside here, you can see the onions need to be really well done. Also what we're going to do is for this, now seriously, every dish we're going to have today has a little coconut in it in one form or another, which just goes to show how prevalent it is. We're just going to add a quarter cup to give it a little like, and once you add coconut, and I'm going to add some salt. Not too much, because this is the quantity, you don't want it to be too salty. So just slightly less than 1 teaspoon. Also, when in a lot of vegetables, you need to be careful about which ones you add salt in before and during cooking and which ones you add after. The vegetables which have a lot of water in them, give that water out if you add too much salt to it. But in this one, it doesn't really quite get the flavor. It tastes a little bit like the salt was added later. So I like to add the salt ahead of time. There. Now we're going to add all the zucchini or bitter gourd or whatever you get. Stir it up. Add a little bit of water, just a dash, so that the coconut doesn't stick. Because at the end, we want this to be just with a little bit of gravy, not very liquidy. And we're going to turn it down to a medium. Actually, we're going to switch this. I'm going to turn that down to a medium. while I work on the sambol. Now, sambol is basically just like spicy coconut. I'm going to add a little salt to this also. Not too much again. You know, it's always better to add salt later because you can tell, and everybody has different salt tolerances. See, this looks so nice. Typically, a sambol is made in a crushed stone vessel, much like guacamole, but hey, that's all right. So this comes frozen and I defrosted it already. It's better to use it defrosted, otherwise the coconut cooks too much and we don't want it to cook too much. So in Sri Lanka, the color for this was bright red, like really red, and the only chili, there's no tomato, it's just chili. Ours is going to be more like orange. So a lot of the food in Sri Lanka, the country was so green. It was beautiful. It's right near the equator, so actually it gets a lot of rainfall and it has the temperatures of the equator. I'm going to reduce this down a bit. And what I felt when I was there was, okay, Sri Lanka is not supposed to be a very rich country, but it's the kind of country that you wouldn't go hungry. Because the trees there are like fruit-bearing trees. If you eat fish, which I think everybody there does, you can the seas around you, there are rivers around you. It's just a beautiful country, like really beautiful. And it's full of these, it has two levels. It has some hills also where you have all the plantations, which are tea plantations. Now, Ceylon or Sri Lankan tea is so famous. What's interesting is it could have been Sri Lankan coffee. Sri Lanka actually used to do coffee, but then at some point there was some sort of pest which took care of all the coffee plantations, and that's when they introduced tea. Hey, we are not complaining. Okay, I'm just going to let this cook for a bit. You can take a look at this, it's so pretty. You can see the color changing. I think I'm going to have to add more spice to this. I'm just going to do a taste test and decide. The color is just like too pale. Definitely needs more chili. You're not supposed to eat huge quantities of this, so it can actually be quite spicy. And I'm going to add some salt also. I'm just going to take it out. Now, I forgot to add some lemon to the sambol. So, I have it right here again. Before you cut it, give it a good rub. And if you just, give it a little squeeze and you give it a good shake, a lot of the seeds come out that way. I really like seedless lemons, even though that's unnatural, as we know. I mean, the whole purpose of a fruit is propagation, right? You want to stir it up. You can actually add a lot more onions too. I haven't today, but sometimes I do. Yummy. So I'm just going to take a quick peek at this. Ooh, it looks good, but it's nowhere near cooked. Now for the lentil, we're going to be making a tempering. So what a tempering does is, very often when you're making lentils in India, you boil the lentil with salt and turmeric, and sometimes you can add a couple of spices, and you prepare the flavor in it separately. You do it in either ghee or you do it in oil. So I'm going to do oil here because I realized, except for like my rice pancakes, the food here is actually vegan. I mean, I wasn't planning for it to be vegan because I love dairy, but that's the way it turned out. So we're going to start off with oil, add a whole bunch of onions to it. Actually, before we add the onions, we're going to add the spices. So we're going to add the mustard seeds. So normally in Indian food, you either put mustard seeds or you put cumin seeds. But in this particular dish, we'll put mustard seeds and cumin seeds. We're going to put some lots of curry leaves, some red chili powder, some whole red chilies which I'm going to crack open. This is a spicy dish, and give it a good stir. That's what a pressure cooker looks like. So I'm going to turn down the heat on that. We're going to let it whistle 4 more times. Meanwhile, in this, we're going to add ginger, a good tablespoon, and a tablespoon of garlic. Can you hear the nice sizzle? And it smells so delicious. This is around a cup of onions, and this is 1 small medium tomato. And now we're just going to let it cook. So let's take a look at this. This looks quite done. The way you check whether it's done is you see how soft one of these things is, one of the zucchinis is. So I'm just going to pull it out in this and use a spoon to see if I can cut it easily, and I can. So this is pretty much done. We're just going to turn it off and leave it open so some of the water evaporates. And this also is almost done. We're just going to wait for the lentils to be cooked. I've turned it off because there were around 3 or 4 whistles, but you need to let the steam come down. I'm going to wait 5 minutes, and after that I'll show you a little trick. If you ever use a pressure cooker, you should never pull the whistle off a pressure cooker like that. You can get steam burns, and I have had steam burns. What you essentially do is, if you really desperately want to open your pressure cooker before the steam's gone, you run cold water, you put it under the sink, and you run cold water over it, and that settles the steam down, and then you can just open it. So I'm going to just taste this to see if it needs any different flavoring. It's perfect. It is so tasty. And I'm going to turn this off because this is done. And while we're waiting, it's been a good 15 minutes, so we can start working on the appam batter. See, this means that the yeast is active, that it's swollen up. So in this, we're going to add around a cup and a half of rice flour. This is rice flour, you can get it in a lot of stores. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're going to add 1 egg. This is slightly messy, but it's okay. Actually, this bowl is a bit small for this. Normally I do it in a bigger bowl. So we're going to mix this up and we're going to let it ferment for 4 hours. I actually fermented some around 4 hours ago because it is so tasty, and you could add beer to it, but my kid loves eating it, so I don't put too much beer in it. Oh, I think that's the coconut rice curry, rice pudding. You have to give it a good stir because you don't want lumpy rice. And when we finish making this, and I'm going to show you a little bit, you have to make sure that this batter is a lot thinner than pancake batter. It can't be too thin because then it won't stick to the side of the pans, and the way you make this is very interesting. But it has to be much thinner than a pancake batter. Okay, there goes. Rice flour is really tasty. So you know, a lot of people feel like rice is pure carbs. It's really not. It has some protein in it. And also the type of rice, if you get polished rice, then obviously it's less healthy for you. But if you get raw rice or brown rice, the textures of all the rices are very different. So how you like the flavor makes a difference. Now I'm also going to add some salt to this. And a little bit of sugar. The sugar we put earlier sort of was consumed by the yeast. And the last thing we add to this is coconut milk, around half a can. Now we are going to put this aside to use after 4 hours, and I'm going to get the pre-made batter, and I'll open up my pressure cooker and be right back. And I'm back. So let's take a look at this. There, you can see it's soft, and then we give it a stir and we mash it in. When you do any beans, if you mash it in, it becomes a lot more flavorful. Now I'm going to take this and add this whole thing to the lentil, the tempering. And as I mentioned, literally everything has some coconut in it. We're going to add a dash of coconut milk. This looks ready. Let me just taste it. I want a little more salt. Other than that, I've deliberately kept it less like hot spicy, and it's perfect. This is really good. And this is done, this is done. For our rice pancakes, there's a special pan you get. It's essentially like a wok if you look at it, and this is non-stick because it's easier to make it on a non-stick. So I have this one specially which is made for making appams or hoppers, but you can just use anything you want. So I'm going to put it here and turn it on high. You cook this on high. Your pan has to be very hot. And while this is being heated up, I'm going to check on the rice pudding. Let me bring it out. I'll bring it and be right back. And I'm back. You can see that this rice pudding is well done. Now, if you want it a bit more liquidy, you can just add a little more coconut milk to it to get the consistency right. Now, we're going to sweeten this, as I mentioned, with jaggery, or gur as it's called. Now, I have so many memories of India when you're driving in the season, and sugarcane, when you have sugarcane and it's being cooked into jaggery, it smells awful. It's like the worst smell in the world. It's like molasses. I'm just going to get a knife and cut some jaggery and be right back. So cutting jaggery is not easy. You have to work pretty hard. It's very hard. You cut it and you sort of let it fall bit by bit. A little more. It is so tasty. When I'm doing this, I always pop a little bit in my mouth. And if you ever, I don't know when and how you will have the opportunity of having fresh jaggery, it just melts into it and changes this color to this nice brown. I'm just going to taste it. It's not sweet enough. Jaggery tastes really nice in mojitos too. If you've ever had a mojito which instead of sugar syrup, they sweeten it with jaggery. Well, if you think about it, very often rum's made from sugarcane, right? So the drinks in Sri Lanka, what's really famous is toddy, which is made from either rice like fermented rice, or palm fruit called tari. There, I think this is done. This is nice, but it's still not sweet enough. I'm going to make it a little bit sweeter still. You know, if you're having a sweet dish, you might as well have it sweet. So this, I've been heating this pan. What you do with this pan is you add a dash of oil. You can't have too much oil, because if you have too much oil, the flour won't stick to the sides. And in a hopper, the sides are really crispy, while the center is a bit thick. And for that, you need the sides to be crispy. So you sort of wipe it off. You take around 3/4 of a cup. And you put it in the middle. Actually, that's a bit much. I think 1/2 cup would have been more appropriate. I'm going to pour some back. You only need a little bit in the middle. And you just cover it and you let it cook. And it cooks for a couple of minutes, and it smells delicious, and it is delicious. So this is called a hopper, and it's a semicircular shape. And sometimes what we're going to do is we're going to add once it's sort of semi-cooked, you crack an egg in it, and you get a sort of like poached egg in the middle, or fried egg, whatever. It's very tasty, so we're going to do that. Meanwhile, I've served out the food, and I'll bring it out. Sri Lankan food is so tasty. Now, what's interesting is a little known fact about Sri Lanka is it's also called serendip, and the word serendipity comes from serendip, maybe because they're like, it's all by chance, or it's so laid back. The nation's also called the nation of the smiling people, and people there are very friendly. We can take a peek. Ooh, it's cooking, but I like the sides to be a bit brown, so I'm going to let it cook a bit more. The more fermented your batter, you know, like in pancakes also, when you have the bubbles which come out, so the more fermented your batter, the more it bubbles, and the crispier it gets and the tastier it gets. Now, egg is optional here, so if you don't want to use egg, you don't really have to. I just like the texture change it gives, so I use it. And this is better on fire rather than an electric stove. This always works out better on a fire. I quite like this. Oops. Now we're going to make a hopper with egg in it. So first I'm going to take around half a cup of batter. If you don't have a non-stick, you need to rub it with oil every once in a while. We're going to let it cook, and once the liquid part has sort of cooked a bit, steamed like this. So, you know, in South Indian food you have something called idli and you have something called dosa. Idli is basically steamed rice pancakes and dosa is crispy. So an appam is a sort of combination of the two. And I'm just going to serve this out onto the plate. Let's take a peek. It's still liquid. You want to make sure that the liquid part has, like in a pancake batter, has cooked through before you add the egg. Otherwise, it doesn't cook properly. You know, any of these cuisines, the food is quite different. So, I mean, it's really not that difficult to try. So, if you make it, it's really quite tasty. And none of the spices I've put today are different from the spices I use in regular North Indian cooking. But the food here tastes so different. I think curry patta has a big deal of the taste difference, curry patta and coconut. There, a little bit more. One more second and then I'm going to crack the egg on it. I love this food. We ate it like every day, a couple of times a day for 9 days, and nobody was tired of it. It was still very tasty. Okay, you can see this white part is cooked. You're going to crack an egg and just put it on top. Okay, it wasn't fully cooked. And you just let it steam. The steam cooks the egg, and the yellow part stays runny, but it's really tasty. And I'm back. Ooh, this is perfect. It's a little bit runny, but I like this dish a little bit runny. And you can see how it's brown around the edges. So we're going to take it out. See, and it gets crispy. So that's good. I'm just going to start one more. And you just run it once. That gives you extra holes. If you run it twice, then that gets covered. And we forgot to discuss the drink for today. Now, as I mentioned, normally they drink toddy or toddy, but I personally love coconut water. Coconut water, I like it fresh from the actual coconut, but that's not easily available. So I find this Vita Coco quite good. If you want to make it more interesting, you can actually add a couple of pieces of pomegranate or mint or a dash of vodka. Vodka and coconut water taste really good together actually. You could add ice, but this is quite cold, so I'm not going to add ice right now. And we're set. So let's go through the dishes again. We have the split pea or yellow pigeon pea or chana dal. We have the coconut sambol. This is normally made with gourd, but we have a zucchini vegetable. And we have rice pudding with chickpeas and jaggery and coconut milk. And we have the hopper, just the plain hopper, which is a rice pancake, and the hopper with the egg with a cold glass of coconut milk. Bon appetit, have fun.